Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Life After Her podcast with yours truly, Nicole and Sweeney. Thank you all for watching and tuning in to today's podcast episode entitled Barbershop Talk. Now, today's podcast is specifically geared towards men and relationships. However, ladies, you can join in on this conversation as well. Today, I have a guest speaker by the name of Reverend Stanley Williams. He is actually a personal mentor and second father to me. And he has been mentoring me just through my college career and into my adulthood. And he's just a trusted voice in this area when it comes to men and relationship and doing it God's way. And so today's conversation is going to be about men and relationships, what God thinks about men, and how we should pursue, how men should pursue relationships with themselves, with others, as well as the community. So, without any further ado, I would like to bring to the stage Reverend Stanley Williams.
Well, grace and peace. Good to see you, Sister Nicole and
Good to
Sweeney.
see you.
Amen.
Good to see you as well, Reverend Stan. How are you feeling today?
I'm feeling real good. It's a privilege. It's an honor. I feel very humbled that you would invite me to be a part of your podcast and to speak into this conversation subject. So
Yeah.
thank you
You're
so much.
welcome. You're welcome. So, before we get into today's questions, I just want to keep it lighthearted. I like for my guests to feel comfortable on this podcast and for the audience just to get to know them a little bit. So, would you like to share a fun fact about yourself, Reverend Stan?
Fun fact.
Yes.
Okay. So fun facts. Fun facts about me or fun facts about when I got to meet all of you at Rutgers.
It could be whatever you decide. It's up to you.
Okay. About me, I guess personally, I've been involved in ministry for 4 decades, and
Wow.
by the
Wow.
grace of God, how about that?
Yeah.
Coming
Yeah.
coming up on my 60th lap around the sun.
God bless.
So
God bless.
I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Um, Fun fact, I enjoy riding bicycles, and I really do enjoy um tinkering. So I like stuff like welding and sewing. Anything that
Mm,
you like bond stuff, yeah,
yeah.
I enjoy it. I think that's a fun fact. I think it's fun. So that's what I'm gonna
I
put on
think
the table.
I think it's pretty cool too, Reverend Stan.
Oh, thank
Um,
you.
so I would say my fun fact about you is you taking us to Africa, Ghana,
Mm,
Africa,
mm.
when we were in college, and when you presented the experience to me and a couple of other my college mates, I was very, I would say, a little fearful.
Mm.
But after I had the conversation with you, you made me feel comfortable. And it's one experience I talked to about my students, my family, and it
Mm.
really shaped um, just like my overall college experience. And so
Mm.
that I would say was probably one of the many fun facts
Wow.
about you.
Wow. You
Yeah.
know what? I thank God that you said yes to God and you went on that missions experience.
Yeah.
And of course, and I don't want to detour from what you have outlined
Yes.
with these 15 questions for us to look at. But in my estimation, the younger a person, as they're growing in their understanding of themselves, their understanding of God, their understanding of the world, the younger in their journey, they can partake in something that is cross cultural, something that puts them in a space where they are dealing with folks who are other than them.
Mm,
Certainly, in as many ways culturally as that is possible, it creates the kind of disequilibrium where they can actually grow because now they have to actually process and reconstitute the schema, which is foundational to how they see themselves, how they relate to the world. And hopefully there are aha moments in that where they say, you know what? Because I've had this experience, because I've had this exposure, not only did I gain some expertise, but I actually now see some new ways, some new spaces, some new places where God could use me. where who I am has value outside of my primary bubble of origination. So I'm glad you said yes to that. I'm grateful that it had that it benefits in your experience long term.
It
Because
did.
I remember some other faces, some grimacing faces.
It was in the moment. It was tough, but
Mhm,
looking
mhm.
honestly, looking back on that experience and
Yeah.
just invested in college students the way that you did, and how just the method that we use with evangelism. I
Mm.
still see myself using that as an adult with the high school students I work with,
Wow.
and so
That's awesome.
things have a way of coming full circle. So thank you, Reverend Stan.
Amen. I'm grateful.
So we have a couple of people watching. Shakira and Jessica says hello. Those are my sisters, so they are viewing today's podcast as well. So thank you guys for tuning in. So let's get right into it, Reverend Stan. What do you believe is the current state of men concerning relationships?
Well, I appreciate that question. And I want to try and frame that question in light of what and this is objective reference. So his name was Stephen Covey, and he penned several books, but perhaps the most famous of all of the things he contributed in terms of scholarship was a book entitled The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. What he introduced in that book, in addition to the 7 habits, was a paradigm. And that paradigm was a paradigm that he calls the adult maturation matrix. In that adult maturation matrix, he frames essentially three, if you will, developmental stages in human being as adults. The first
Mm-hmm.
of them he describes as dependence. All of us start our journey on this planet as dependents. Hopefully, we move from dependence to independence. Hopefully, because it doesn't always happen. There are a variety of things that can undercut. We'll talk about it if we have to in certain ways. A lot of things that can undercut us moving from dependence to independence, especially as we talk about that in light of the, the free market economy, which is the North American experience. I'm not going to get into that unless I have to. But if we talk about in our very frank and candid, forthcoming and honest about the fact that we are in a tapestry, in an ecosystem where money, I believe it was Wu Tang, the Wu Tang clan that said cash rules everything around me. If we include that, that becomes another filter that frames and factors to militate against how people move from dependence to independence. Okay,
Okay.
and then from independence in this matrix in this paradigm, he frames the third level. And the third level is the important level in relationship to the question you asked when we talk about relationships. Because whatever else a relationship between two grown people is intended to be, it is intended to be an experience where two grown people who have moved past dependence and have moved past dependence are actual viable candidates for what Covey formed in this matrix as the third level in the adult maturation process and praxis, which is interdependence. And at
Okay.
interdependence, now we're talking about grown people who can actually be trusted or reliable as it relates to given roles, given relationships, and relational dynamics and responsibilities that come with there too, all the rest of the ways you want to frame that. And as we talk about um, men, and I'm speaking generically when I say that,
Sure.
men, okay, because if we would be fair about that question, there is a psychographic and an ethnographic reference point of filtering even then, because we would have to at least account for the fact that specific psychographic, specific ethnographic constructs demographically of the full male population don't have as difficult a pilgrimage from dependence to interdependence as others do. But that informs, from my vantage point, I think the best objective reference point against which to have this discussion. The challenges for men relationally, to be ready for interdependence is how I would try to frame that. And what we look at there is that on the basis of a variety of things, some of them are systemic, and then others of them are just societal, and then a few others of them are just based on the setting that informs their journey. um, it's a challenge for men to be ready for relationships at the interdependent level, especially if we're going to talk about the male, the masculine, the man's role in at least in our current social construct. Certainly, if we're going to talk scripturally, um,
Mm-hmm.
with the man's role. So yeah, that's a challenge, and that's how I see it.
Mm.
um, I hope that frames and answers the question. I can delve deeper into elements of that if you want to, or we can start there and go somewhere else. But that's
Yeah,
how I would start.
can we go into that a little deeper just so that the audience can understand specifics of what you
Sure,
are talking speaking to?
sure. So we come as dependents. That means we basically are leaning on somebody
Right.
to meet needs in our journey. We move from that, hopefully, to become independent, where we take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then hopefully we grow even beyond that to the place where we are ready to be the kind of grown people who can be depended on to take care of our business and the portion of somebody else's business, which rightly falls in that relationship to our role. I hope that
Okay.
is more direct.
Yes, yes, that makes sense. So what are some scenarios that could um that could present that type of situation? So like you say, depending on yourself as well
Mhm.
as maybe a child depending on you or a parent depending
Yeah.
on you or a sibling depending on you or a significant other.
Significant,
So
a
are those the
significant
type
other.
of okay,
Mhm.
a significant
Yeah,
other?
let's just let me just put it in Destiny Child language from the first book of Destiny Child, chapter 2, verse 16. Can you pay my
Really
bills?
represent.
Can you pay my telephone bills? Can you pay my automobiles? That's how she put it. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, so
And
go ahead, I'm sorry.
no, I was just gonna say, so that is a very practical, that is a very tangible, that that is a layer in reliability. Let's just frame it that way.
Okay, so bills, what are some other
So
elements
so so
to
that's a
that?
financial, that's a financial piece.
Right.
And as we talk about, so and I don't want to even, I really just put that out there at anecdotally, because when we talk in terms of core dynamics at the level of core dynamics, we're talking relationally, being
Yeah.
available, being present, um, being so I frame in light of Richard Swinson. Swinson wrote a book called Margin. This is an old book, and it helped me to have some aha moments of clarity about who we are. Swinson suggested in several chapters that there are four foundational relational currencies. When we talk about ready to enter the pen, we have to talk about the most important of all the currencies, which is goodwill. And that is intentionality. Clearly, there's an axiom that says the road to hell is paved with good intentions, but to be intentional and to be consistently of goodwill in a relationship frames whether or not a person has credibility. Okay.
Mm,
And
mhm,
so when we talk about being able, one, to make, and then two, to keep a promise, that the infrastructure of that capacity to keep a promise, to make a promise, is based in goodwill.
mhm,
um, the second of those currencies is trust, and so being trustworthy. So we're still talking credibility constructs at this point, and they're relational, so they have gravity. If you prove to me that I can't trust you, but you keep asking me to, but there's some other stuff that's underpinning that I know about myself. If I'm clear with myself about myself, I
mhm,
know that there's some things that impair or dysfunctional dysfunctionally disarm my capacity to actually operate consistent with my intentions, um, then let's unpack that. That may have something to do with how I matured or have not matured as it relates to moving beyond dependence past independence to the space where I'm ready to be someone you can trust,
Mm-hmm.
someone you can rely upon,
Mm-hmm.
to not only be consistent in terms of goodwill, but to also be someone that you can trust in terms of, how I lean on you, how I actually bank upon what you say and how you'll behave. And then, thirdly, we talk about relational currencies: goodwill. Number two, trust. Number three is respect, because
Mm.
because that's the principal category in terms of relational interaction dynamics and growth. And then finally, fourth, honesty, the willingness to actually be transparent, and so being honest isn't just quote unquote telling the truth. It's actually being of a of a sense of acceptance with yourself, that you embrace you and are willing to share as many layers as you know you can handle sharing, and you hope the person that you're sharing with can handle receiving about who you are, what you want, and the things on that level. And that kind of transparency, that level of forthcomingness is a function in the adult matrix maturation. And that's what I'm attempting to speak to. I'm trying to put it in theory. If you pull it on the practical, I'll try and illustrate it. But I'm trying to cover as quickly as much ground as I can in light of all these questions I see on the page.
Mercy, let's okay.
I couldn't
No,
help it. I couldn't help it. Yes, ma'am. But
but
but I hope that helps some.
yeah, it does help. So you said goodwill, trust, respect, and transparency. And I
Yes,
think,
ma'am.
yes, we're having this conversation around men, but I think this is um these four areas are good with any relationship that we entertain or get into: business relationships, work
Yes.
relationships, friendships. And as you're speaking to these points, I'm just thinking about the types of audience that watch this broadcast, and
Yeah.
some of
Yeah.
it will be teenagers,
Yeah.
teenage girls, teenage boys, adults, men, women. So I think this, what you just shared, speaks to relationship dynamics, friendship dynamics, and anywhere you do relationships.
Yes,
So,
ma'am. Yeah. But especially when we talk about the relationships that we're hoping we can have that will last a lifetime. So
yeah.
when you talk, so when you're talking about lifetime relationships where you have two adults who are not just beyond dependence. Let's be clear about that. They're not just beyond dependence, because if we're okay, who is it? So her name is Sharon Parks. Sharon Parks. She writes a book, um, Worthy Dreams, Big Questions, Worthy Dreams. Big questions, worthy dreams. And one of the things that I appreciate that she does in this book, because she's attempting in the book to help us to appreciate, her overarching goal in the book isn't to talk about what I'm about to talk about. She talks about this on the way to what she wants to talk about. But she gives, I think, a very succinct, nevertheless substantial exploration of this matrix. She does. And she spends, um, what I think is an appropriate amount of attention and time dealing with the juncture between dependence and independence, which is a fundamental part of the nexus of the journey of a young adult. Because
What are
if,
the ages of a young adult? Just so we specify for the audience in case they may not know.
sure, so there are two in the Western design. Let's just be clear about that. The Western design, young adults, we're going to talk about two primary ones: the 18 to 30 window, roughly, and the 30 to 45 window, roughly. You may say
Okay.
30 to 50, 30 to 50, 30, 45, somewhere in there. Those are two different young adult windows. One is the infant adult, and the other is the childish adult. But they're both adults,
Mm-hmm.
at least in how we function in North America. You're 18, you're grown. Um, and so those filters frame some things about um, how we how we grow grown people. Okay.
How we
Um,
grow grown people.
yes. And so so there's a disservice. It's called adolescence. And so adolescence is 12 to 18. So from 12 to 18 in the current cultural construct that is ours in North America, and not just North America, frankly, the Western world,
Mm-hmm.
in any part of the world, the Western world predominates, which therefore means pervasively other what are have hitherto been known as less developed countries that have been pervasively influenced by Westernization. The same is true there. That from roughly 12 to 18, 19, here's what happens: you get to make adult choices without being responsible for the adult consequences of those choices.
Mm.
So
Okay.
what that frames is the propensity for you to do some grown people stuff and develop some grown people attitudes and have some grown people baggage that you do not know how to dismantle or do anything with other than deal with in on the interior of your personhood as it relates to not only how you're matriculating but whether or not you even mature before you have to, in the adult schema of things, be responsible for those consequences. So it's
Mm.
already doing something to you. It's already done a lot to you because you
Yeah.
made the choices, but you weren't responsible for them. And when we talk about, okay, so so the brother's gonna be upset with me for this one, but in Western culture in particular, and I would argue pretty much where everywhere on the planet, there is a male pass on stupid stuff you can do between the ages of 12 and 18 and 19 that sets brothers up for failure in relationship to themselves and in relationship to having a good relationship that can go the distance in life. That's what I think.
Okay. That's a valid point. What do you think are some contributing factors as to why that is?
Really.
What?
So here in our
Represent what you're
culture, in our
having a
culture,
conversation, right?
right. This barbershop. See, the brothers is like they might snatch my car for this one right here. That's all I'm saying.
Listen, we are
Okay,
here
so
to offer a different perspective on how we do life, relationships, and
right,
within
right,
themselves. So,
right, right. So there is in our culture, we actually give males males in general from 12 to 19 a pass on some stuff. Um, and that's irrespective of whether they're in a prototypical nuclear family construct where they have a mom and a dad, or uh, if they're being raised by one parent. There's a pass in the thing. Let me put it in a couple of anecdotes that you probably have heard. Here's one of them. Moms raise their daughters and love their sons.
I've heard of that.
But what does that speak to? I need to seek to unpack some of that. So what that speaks to is that in the pre-adolescent and the adolescent matrix for girls, there are expectations that you are already thinking about your journey into being independent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If not, on top of that, a template with some core themes for who you need to be to qualify as a candidate for being interdependent.
Wow.
But that's not the case for the largesse of males in the same age framing. Do you appreciate the implications of that?
I do, and I have a follow-up question, but I don't want to start any trouble, so I'm not gonna
Hey, this
answer.
is the barbershop. You done wrecked the barbershop, so you may as well put it out there.
So, do you feel or believe that contributes to, let's say, the lack of marriages in this generation, um, or men not desiring marriage as
Okay.
often, because I feel like your generation and up, that was kind of the expectation, like to have a family, get married. But I feel like with my generation, it looks totally different. Like that is not something that, I won't say most, but some men desire.
Right.
They don't desire that. So do you think that it has an impact on relationships, marriage, singleness, all of that stuff?
Yeah. So this is barbershop talk. I'm getting in trouble for talking about this stuff. Okay.
You'll be fine, Reverend Stan.
No, I won't. I won't be fine. Brothers, I won't be fine. I'll be fine. Especially if people take pictures of this and say, that's the guy who told me right there. You know, somebody see me. I might not even have air in my tires when I go outside. It might be that quick. It just might be that terrible. Y'all don't understand. The system really works. The system really works. Okay. Okay. So if we're being frank, the so for the few who can afford to, or at least think in their minds, they are actually ready and can afford what is expected of them. For that group, there there is pause that okay, if this doesn't work, I lose more
Mhm.
than I really know I'm gonna lose, and it may impact qualitatively the level of who I am and what I have. I get to keep
Yeah,
when I make this choice, and for a lot of younger adult men, they actually have precedent. I mean, I could name some cases where they would be like, "You remember what happened to so and so?"
yeah,
So
yeah,
these are popularized cases of men who had the wealth, who in some level at some level had established and acquired quote unquote the dream,
yeah.
or at least an appreciable slice of it. And yet, because a relationship failed, a formal relationship. Let me be clear about that. One where they, tied the knot, put the ring on it, all the rest of the stuff that we in our cultural construct say you should do it the right way, constitutes. When they see those fail and they see how the male is invariably going to be the one who takes the brunt of losing half, and then some other stuff. Yeah, I think that those that younger generation is like, no, I
Yeah.
might lose. That's one, but that's only one layer. That's only
Okay.
one layer. I
Yeah.
think the other piece to it, and which is why I was talking about the double standard from 12 to 19. And
Sure.
I think that's a more appropriate place to start than what happened to X and Y person who's in the media who just lost all their money in their homes. Because I think that's tertiary. I really do think that's tertiary. I think what's primary is the habits and attitudes that were cultivated from 12 to 19, which were formed and formulated in light of, I would say in light of, not in spite of, but in light of the dichotomy and the duality, which is um, the youth male and young adult male set of expectations for who you should grow to be as a grown person.
Mm-hmm.
And those are the things that I think frame why most of the young adults that are say 40 and younger would say this is not for me.
Yeah.
I mean they would actually say it is not for me.
Wow.
They won't say just that, I'm waiting for the right one. They will say no. There is no right one. This is not for me.
Wow.
They would actually say it. I meet with a group of young men. I'm not gonna name the campus because then I'm really through. They won't. I will
Mm.
not get a chance to talk to these brothers ever again. I hope brothers just understand. I'm just doing this as a favor because that's my daughter right there. Just understand. You understand? um, but here, this is a group of young adult guys in their 20s. These guys are in their 20s. Most of these guys are in their 20s. Some are in their early 30s. Most of them are in their 20s. And they have said in several conversations, we get very candid and discuss. They'll say, you know what? I'm not supposed to get married.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's,
They would say, I'm not supposed to get married. Now, they won't say I'm not supposed to be sexually involved with a female, but they will say I'm not supposed to get married.
Wow.
Not supposed to.
Wow.
I think to me, that's heavy.
That's very heavy.
Yeah. 2006. I'm trying to remember who did this, but it was in Philadelphia. Group. This is a group. This is 2006 teenagers. So these kids are between the ages of 13 and 15. 2006. We fast forward 18 years. 18. So these are 30 something year olds right now. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
ear Late 20s, early 30s. They actually these kids were interviewed as a part of a study. Several of them said marriage. Okay, I don't know who's. They said marriage is for white people. That's what they actually said.
Really?
Yes, this is a quote. I wish I could find. I'm gonna pull up that. That's why I was asking what I can. I'll shoot you the link so you can read the article. I keep a copy
Okay.
of it. Um, but in this study, this group of middle school kids, they were in Philadelphia from select middle schools in Philadelphia. All said, this is not for us.
Wow.
The institution is not for us. One kid actually said it's not designed to work for black people. He said that.
Wow.
Yeah. So so and of course they started unpacking what that was. Several of them would say based on what I see. So there was an experiential reference. Okay. And they would talk about either their own primary family or relatives or close
Mm-hmm.
friends and so this is not something they're pulling out of the sky or dreaming up. This is not fiction for them. This is framed out of their lived journey and the
Yeah.
narrative with which they are familiar, either first person or on the basis of second person connections with significant people in their journey. And they make this conclusion: this is not for us. It's not for
Yeah.
me. I'm not supposed to get married.
Yeah. Yeah. Those experiences and those points are valid because I work with high school students and a lot of them have anxiety with relationships, and they, like you were just saying, they just do not have positive or healthy examples of what it means to be in a relationship or a marriage that is healthy and that is designed to leave the legacy, and that's positive, period.
Yeah,
So the
yeah,
younger generation, they just don't have that, unfortunately.
yeah. So to come back to the piece where I was saying, because I get I saw something happen across the street, this kind of thing. But what I want to talk about is first person foundational and fundamental stuff from 12 to 19. And the thing that I'm trying to reference is the ways in which relationally young males, because of this double standard, end up relationally broken.
Mm,
Um, and if not relationally broken, because no one wants to talk about it, but brothers get traumatized in some stuff as well.
yes, I agree, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this series, specifically focusing on men, because men also have experiences that are very traumatic. And
Yeah.
I've heard stories, and so they go through it just like women do.
Yes, they do. Yeah. So there's a few that, and I'm not trying to say this is the staple narrative, but there's this piece where um, a young male who puts his heart on his sleeve. Perhaps because he has been over nurtured and understructured, he comes to what it means to do relationships without any clear understanding about his boundaries. And that's the point I want to try and get at quickly. So when moms raise their daughters, when dads raise their daughters, they clearly attempt to help their daughters define boundaries. And if they don't see them proficiently with them, they will protect those boundaries or try to. Um, and I think, unfortunately, because of the way this double standard functions, young boys, younger men, are behaving as adults without an understanding of of the value of their boundaries, and the danger of having those boundaries violated. Um,
Mm,
and the way that will unpack itself in terms of the relational, I don't want to say incapacities, but certainly relational challenges, deficiencies, predispositions to be less trusting, less forthcoming, less rely. I mean, just walk it down, on the basis of the fact that you did not learn to steward your boundaries as a younger man. Um,
mm,
and so I try to talk to some of what you framed in some of these questions,
yeah.
in terms of the earlier stages, because
Okay. Yes.
because I think those histories, they inform why when you come to 25, 35, 40 years old, a young lady's having the challenges she's having with whoever she's identified as a significant other.
Yeah.
It started long before you.
Mm, yeah. That's a very, very good point, which leads me into my next question. What do you think is God's design for men in their relationship with God?
Okay, so when I do premarital with folks, I challenge folks to appreciate that Jesus Christ is the perfect example, both for the husband and for the wife. Obviously, he's the perfect example for the husband, as you know, Paul talks about in Ephesians 5. But he's also a perfect example for the wife in the sense that he demonstrates what it means to yield and to submit. And so you get in Jesus Christ both men and women an excellent example of who, as they relationally mature and progress and develop, they can identify in Christ thematically and in terms of his life practices, that which is going to be the stuff that they want to appropriate into themselves and imitate in how they behave. That said, the the part that as I frame this thematically, I would say becoming God's man and behaving like Christ are the key asymptotes. If we're going to call it X and Y coordinates in this, obviously there are multiple dimensions, but becoming the man of God and behaving like the Christ, in terms of the relationship, I think are the two principal lines, that as we look in Scripture and metric, the upward call of God, one. And as we metric what it means to grow deeper in knowing Christ, two, and imitating Him, those would be the two places where I try to frame that and then walk in Scripture in terms of themes. For me, I believe 2 Peter chapter 1, 2 Peter chapter 1, the Apostle Peter there talks about first the promises of God. And so he frames the fact in verses 3 and 4 that these promises they're given so that we might actually be partakers in the divine nature. So this is promises functioning with a purpose that we might actually partake in the very nature of God, becoming the man or the woman of God. So he layers there from verse 5 to like verse 10, verse 11. He says, therefore, add to your faith. And he just names some things. And so, as I talk about the metric, if I'm going to try and sequentially frame it, if I'm going to sequentially, one, or thematically, two, I would use the language found in those verses as um, either the the sequential metric, or if I were going to try and look at the dimensions of how a person becomes a multi-dimensional, if you will, a well-rounded uh, woman or man of God. That's where we're going to talk. We're going to talk in terms of faith and virtue. We're going to talk in terms of those things that are found in that particular passage. Why? Because the promises of God are universal as a reference point for um, who God has invited us to become as we step out in faith and obey Him according to the promises that He has given us. So that would be the first. I think the second, we're going to talk about becoming like Christ. then there are a couple other places where I'm going to look. Obviously, the first of them is going to be in terms of paradigms and priorities. We have a few places in Scripture where that's framed according to the apostles. The first that I think is of significance is in terms of character, and the apostle
Hmm.
Paul, Philippians 2, actually gives us paradigm, fundamental cornerstone idea when he says humility.
Okay.
Philippians 2, 3, and 4. So Philippians 2, 3, and 4, the scriptures make it plain. He says there, look not only on your own things, but look also on the things of others. He says, let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus. And then he talks about the humility of Jesus Christ. He humbled himself and he became obedient. And so this is the issue. This is the issue for what's the issue for all of us, but it's certainly the issue for a man is to humble himself, and to be a person. Um, you see, in the barbershop, I can see the barbershop right now. Okay, a man who is not driven by his ego,
Mm,
and in relationship to now he has to be able to give leadership, and if he's going to give
right.
leadership, there's a definite need for humility. Otherwise, um, I'm not gonna say, you know what? Let me just lift this on the table. I'll put this on the table. The other day, I'm not gonna name the city I was in. I am. I was in Camden. I was in Camden, and I was in Camden. I was just gonna go right down there by Rutgers, and
Mhm.
so I had parked my vehicle. Well, I was trying to park my vehicle, and I was trying to put my vehicle in one parking space. But there was
Yes.
this sister who had her vehicle in two parking spaces. Two parking spaces. I'm trying to put mine in one, but her vehicle is straddling two. So
Uh-huh.
as I do my little thing to kind of parallel back in, she starts honking at me. It's like it
Like,
was a
what you
scene.
doing?
It was a scene. And so then she gets out of her vehicle and starts rolling the neck and all of this here. And she's coming at me. And so and I'm like, okay, and I'm just being quiet. And so she rails and she comes at me. And so I said, sister, excuse me. Um, your vehicle is straddling two parking spaces. And you know what she said? She said, that ain't the point. I said, oh my God. I said, oh my God. I said, oh my God. But here's the that was an illustration for this. If indeed a man is going to be effective in a relationship, humility has to be his temperament. Um,
Mm,
has to be his temperament. Because for Jesus, who models these things for us, being found, he was found. He knows who he is. He knows who he is. But he does not
yeah,
function on the basis of what his essence is. He functions on the basis of his role. Let's be clear about that. Which is a heavy piece in the assignment of being a man.
it is very heavy because, like you were saying earlier, I feel like society teaches men to be very proud and you speak up and you have to behave a certain way to make your presence known. However, that impacts whoever you are speaking to or dealing with or interacting with. And if you
Right.
don't show that presence, that power, you're seen as weak.
There it is. And so now we're going to talk about a variety. And you know what? And I know that I'm attempting to come in one line on this, but there are too many facets to what we just named when we talk about um, power dynamics and respectability,
Hmm.
especially in the cultural milieu, which is this one.
Yeah.
um, because depending on what ethnographic and psychographic and other demographic markers frame your identity, let's be very clear that you will not be respected. Um,
Yes.
you can demand it, you can flex it, but you're not going to receive respect in the macro scheme of things, or even unfortunately in the microcosm, which is the male female relationship. And I think
Mhm.
that's something that in the barbershop brothers talk about. Brothers talk about the fact that it is challenging, depending on where the sister's coming from, for a sister to show the brother the kind of respect that is intrinsic to the essence of who he is as a man. Um,
Mm,
so those become markers for what can be problematic triggers when you talk about how the relationship either flourishes or fragments and fails.
mm,
But humility. So we get back on the thing that I was talking about. So grow in becoming the man of God. One, grow in terms of how you live like Christ. And so we have in the apostles' letters very specific places where they lift, they elevate character traits of Jesus Christ. And so I just named one because I think it's very important. Paul
yes.
names it there. Peter names the same one. This is what Peter says. So Paul says for Philippians 2, chapter 2, verses 3 and following. But Peter actually comes at the same idea. So we have two apostles. Peter says it. First Peter 5:5 and 6. Peter says, God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble
Yes.
yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. So, humility is not marketed in light of the life of Christ like Paul does it, because Paul, I think, is more emphatic in terms of lifting the example of the life of Christ, the nuances in the motive of Christ, in some ways that may not be as prominent in the language of Peter's letters, but they're both trying to talk about character traits, and
Yeah.
their reference point for that is definitely Christ centered. So
Yeah.
so so that would be kind of how I would say to answer your question. A relationship with God. Let's talk about you becoming like God in terms of godliness, and then let's talk about behaving. So one is becoming like, and the other is behaving like. Um, Becoming like God in terms of godliness, behaving like Christ in terms of Christ likeness, and then in the in the way those two fold together, um, I think you grow. I think you become an attractive man from the inside out.
Mm, I like that. So, what with everything that you just said, what do you believe that is God's design for a man in terms of his relationship with himself, like his inner
Okay,
man? What is
okay,
God's design for that?
okay. So we come back to the Apostle Paul, and I'm still speaking in terms of this upward journey.
Yeah.
So the I think, and this is going to come to some of the stuff that I was initially intimating when we talk about early brokenness.
Yes.
So we know that in Christ, on the basis of the finished work of Jesus Christ, we have peace with God.
Mm-hmm.
But on the basis of how we grow in grace and in the knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, we experience the peace of God.
Yeah.
So it's one thing to know that God has forgiven me, but it is another thing on the basis of walking with God to come to the place where I can forgive myself,
Mm.
and graciously the embrace, have grace be the referent, and the truth of God be the referent for how I embrace my narrative, my whole narrative.
Mm.
Um, uh, I think that's a process.
What do you
Um,
what do you what do you mean by narrative? In case some people may not understand
it's
specifically what you
it's
mean by that.
it's my whole story.
My story.
It's my story. It's how I came to be. It's why I do what I do. It's what
Mm-hmm.
I've been through. It's the totality of the questions which are framed by the answers that, if I'm honest, I have to give about who I am and why I am what I am, where I've been, why I did what I did, what I went, all of that. The whole
Yeah.
the whole narrative. Yes, the whole story.
Yeah. Okay.
Um, and Okay, so and this is linear because there's too many layers in this, but there's a season on the basis of my adult maturation where if I do my narrative as a dependent
Okay.
who is immature, I might blame somebody else for my problems.
Mm.
Um, or whatever else it is, it ain't my fault. Um,
Mm.
what my
Mhm.
fault. What had happened was I'm not guilty. I was never guilty. I did not do anything wrong. Um, that I do not accept the blame. I do not accept the responsibility. I
Yeah.
don't. It's not mine. Who? Somebody other than me. Something other than my causality. I did not cause this. That is my story. Somebody else caused my story.
Mm. So why is it important for us not to do do it that way? Like what?
Yeah. So anytime as an adult, okay, so you can talk about children, okay, and you can talk about childish adults. You can even do that.
Oh
Infant
yeah.
adults. You can do
Hmm.
that. But if we're going to talk about being the kind of adult that is an adult who's ready to be interdependently relating to the rest of the world, beginning with a significant other, I have to take responsibility for me.
Yeah.
Because if I won't take responsibility for me, I'm not really a viable candidate to be responsible for anyone else.
What do you mean? Can you define viable in like one sentence just so that people understand what viable means, Reverend Stan?
One sentence, right? You
I mean,
know,
Reverend Stan, you are a genius and everybody is not on your level intellectually. So I just,
I'm not a genius.
well,
I'm
I think
I'm
you're a
a
genius, but I
I'm a
want
Rudy
people
fan.
just to understand.
Viable. Wow. You know what? I'm using that word as a with a presumption. But when I say viable, so let me use a different word. Credible.
Okay.
Um um
Okay.
legitimate. Um 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 see that I'm almost used the word again. But someone who has has proven, who has a track record. I'm really trying to make this real condensed.
Yeah.
Really straining me. You straining me.
Reverend Stan
Um,
is
someone who
for the
has a
viewers to
proven.
help them
I'm
understand.
trying. I'm trying. Someone who has a proven track record and reputation um, for being responsible for themselves.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
Um,
Okay.
not shifting, not triangulating. Um, yeah, they just say, "Yep, that was me.
Yeah.
That was me." Yeah,
Okay.
I did choose that. I did.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
and not with arrogance. Okay, so you can come at this. Hopefully, as you mature, because there's a season in this when you're viable, but you are also um, flagrant, brazen,
Mm-hmm.
and I would argue that that person, while they may be not necessarily a dependent and maybe not even an independent, is not characteristically humble. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I'm not going to name anybody that's running for leader of the free world, but
Right.
there's a
Oh yeah.
brazen propensity in a variety of people to say, yeah, I did it and I get away with it, and that's just
Right.
how it goes because that's who
Right.
I am.
Mm-hmm.
But that's another conversation. But
It
yeah,
is.
so humility
Okay.
in that, and that's why I try to name godly and Christ-like, because, but yeah, being responsible.
Yeah. Okay. So next question. What do you believe is God's design for men and their relationship with women?
Okay, so relational currencies framed. I think that Ephesians 5 frames principle that we
Yeah.
look in the example of Jesus Christ, and
Mm-hmm.
we talk about men therefore being willing, which is goodwill, to actually nurture as they nurture themselves. So that language there is actually nourish and nurture.
Okay.
Um, and so Peter comes at it with different language, um, and he talks about stronger and weaker. But I like the language in Paul where he talks about nurture and nourish. Um, be a source of life,
Mm.
and
Mm.
what makes for life, what makes for living. So I think that's a starting place. I think there's an attitudinal dimension to that, which is framed in the same passage, and that is sacrificial, because that's what we also
Mm,
see in the language of that passage. Um,
mm.
Sacrificial. Now, this is a Christian barbershop talk here. This ain't got nothing to do with the regular barbershop. Just putting that on the table so that you,
Listen,
if you go back talking to the regular brothers and they don't come with this, let me just help you understand. They got a regular barbershop. They barbershop don't talk about discussion.
let's be clear.
This, this
Okay,
is
I'm glad you specified.
okay. I want to make sure because
Right.
I don't know who's in your listening audience and all of that, but I heard so and so is in the barbershop. No, we don't.
Yeah.
We ain't talking about sacrificing because I want to make sure I put that contrast there
Yeah.
because you asked me about God, okay? But this is barbershop, and the average barbershop is not coming on this level about how men relate to women. I'm just going to keep that right there.
Yeah,
All
absolutely.
right. Okay. So
Yes.
now let's come back to God and Jesus in Ephesians chapter 5.
You have the floor.
So nurturing in a sacrificial with a say so goodwill that's sacrificial that intends its goal is to nurture and nourish life.
Those are
Peter,
two very powerful statements. I'm sorry, go ahead.
yeah, yeah, Peter frames it with respect to justice and equity. So I think those are other constructs in this. Um, um, we know that in a very functional and real sense, there is still disparity. Um, Go anywhere else in the world, it's too obvious. It's baked into the way that social construct works. But the same is true even here, where we claim to be the land of the free, the home of the brave, with equal, with liberty and justice for all. That's what it says. Um, um, that's just not true.
Mm,
And yet, if we're going to talk about some of the ways that that relationship and the interplay in it ought to function,
yeah.
it should, on the basis of goodwill, facilitate sacrificial nurture and nourishment that facilitates life with a view towards equity.
Mm,
Um, and so I think that's an important framing at the foundational level of how goodwill behaves, if we're talking about God's design, men and women relating.
can you
Um,
give an example or an illustration of what equity, justice, source of life, and sacrifice would look like in a male female dynamic?
sure. So we don't know what life was like before the fall.
Mm-hmm.
We don't,
Mm-hmm.
but we can dream about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as men are open to how the spirit unpacks through dreams and visions, um, of who their significant other can be, that they're open to how the spirit wants to use them in an agent way, a primary sense of agency in their spouse's life to help their spouse actually maximize their humanity and their personhood, in spite of where they may find themselves in the social construct on planet Earth.
Wow. That takes a lot of humility.
Well, it does. It does.
Yeah.
Um, but let's be clear that that I think is in the language. I think that's even in the life that we see lived out with several key people. So if we go back to Boaz and Ruth, we have to see that Boaz is very strategic in how he uses his position, how he uses his power to be a source of protection and to facilitate positioning Ruth and Noemi to flourish. I think that's there. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so those
I
become
agree.
examples. Yeah, those become
Okay.
examples. Yeah.
That's a good example. I never read the book of Ruth in that perspective. So you just gave me another lens to look at it.
Yeah. So here's a man who has options, but he chooses to empower.
Mm,
So
wow.
I think that's a term that's got uh, I forget what the word is. You know the word that
What?
has traction, currency. That word has currency, empowerment. And
Yes.
so that may be one of the terms that helps frame the way in light of Christ and who God has called us to be, that men sacrificially nurture and nourish life with a view towards equity, empowerment. That may be one of the ways you look at that.
That was an affirmation right there. I love how you put that. I'm gonna have to go back and write that out.
Yes, ma'am. I hope it helps.
It definitely helps. So what do
Yeah.
you think is God's design for men in their community?
Wow. So so this is why I think there is an agenda to underdevelop men, number one,
Mm,
and where they do develop, to look for ways to emasculate or parochialize, because as it relates to how I see that question unpacking itself, um, you look in scripture and you'll find that men would congregate at the gate, and then they would congregate at other specifically strategic spaces within where the community functioned.
mm-hmm.
um, Not only as gatekeepers to guard stuff, but they were functioning in those specific spaces to actually ensure that the kinds of things that dynamically must needs happen actually happened and flourished in those spaces.
Yeah.
So whether we're talking about the marketplace, and
Mm-hmm.
every community ought to have a thriving marketplace. That is where the ecosystem of that community um, is refortified, um, uh, gains its momentum, and through its largesse, causes its affluence to abound and buoy everybody. I think the axiom goes this way: a rising tide lifts all ships,
Mm,
something like that. Um, and so when the ecosystem has the men to not only guard it and to gate it, but to also govern and to grow it, then what I believe will happen as God has men who are fulfilling their assignment in their community, is that community, it elevates. You talking
yeah.
to a chocolate man who went to Howard, and so you know me, okay?
I
So
was that was going to be my next follow-up question. Do you feel that, and I know this answer already, but do you feel that there are certain types or groups of men racially who are underdeveloped and who where you see certain communities not thriving versus others? And what are your thoughts about that?
yeah, so you pushing my buttons, and I'm gonna try and be civil with how I respond, because I don't know where this is in the internet. Um, um, you know what I'll do instead of getting myself in trouble is
Okay.
I will get I don't know how you do this. Can you flip this backwards? Because I don't know how it shows up on your screen. Does it show up right
People see
side?
it. People see it.
Yeah,
I don't know how to do that, Reverend Stan, but if you want
you,
to,
you
they
can
see
see
it.
it.
They, I can see it. Yes, the sum of us. Yes.
Yes, yeah. So not me. I didn't say this. She did. She did.
Who can I
I
see?
didn't
Can you
say
move
it.
it up so I can see the author's
Sure.
name? Move
Yeah.
it up a little bit higher. Heather McGee.
Yes.
Okay, Heather McGee. Okay, Jessica said that we. She said they can see it.
Yes.
Can see it.
So Heather McGee said this better than I can say it.
Yeah.
But what she talks about in her book, which is very factual and very extensively documented,
Yeah.
is she walks through how racism impacts everybody.
Mm, yeah.
Matter of fact, since I'm doing this, I'm gonna give equal play. because she wasn't the first one to say it. There's a white supremacist who said this first. His name, I'm gonna put his name up here too, so you can see this. This book was first published in 1857.
What,
This book is
Hinton or Winton?
Hinton. Where's this?
Hinton. Help.
Yeah, Hinton Helper. That's his name.
Okay.
Yeah, Hinton Helper. Now, I want to say something about Hinton Helper. This is an avowed white supremacist.
Mm,
So
okay.
he hates black people.
Mm-hmm.
But even Hinton said in 1857, we got to get rid of the slaves. He said
Wow.
it. He said having slaves in America is affecting poor white people. That's what he said.
Oh, wow.
So my point in all that is this: yes, if we're going to talk about, especially if we're going to talk about being interdependent, because if you're going to function in westernized realities on this planet, cash rules everything around me is what Dr. Wu Tang in chapter 4, 5, and 6 said, according to his version of the scriptures. But we have to deal with the economic implications of how wealth is either accessible or inaccessible
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the viability of a community.
Yeah.
And on the basis of the community, the households which constitute it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is, yeah, it is. It's dollar bills, and unfortunately, when we talk about the role of men in communities, God intends that they are the persons who function at the gates and in the other central and strategic places so that we can grow our ecosystems. Um, Other communities do this all the time.
Yeah.
And I believe that when you look and you see it, it's because the men in those communities have said, this is what we must do together
Yes.
in a coordinated and a cooperative way so that our well-being is not only safeguarded, but our well-being is actually reinforced, nurtured, and can flourish.
And sustainable.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it can be done. It can be done.
Yeah.
It can be done even when people put a big red mark on your back to target you, to continuously take from you not only your livelihood but your very life. It can still be
Mm,
done because the Lord is my shepherd and the Lord is my light. When my enemies came upon me to eat of my flesh, they stumbled and fell.
they
And that's because the Lord is indeed who the Lord said He would be for those who look to Him, for those who lean upon Him, for those who cry out to Him. He will be their shepherd. He will be their protection.
Amen. Amen. We received that on this podcast.
Amen.
Amen. So, what do you think the purpose of a man is? Why did God create man?
Okay. So
I'm
let
just
us
saying,
make
don't act
man.
like you didn't get these questions in advance.
You did. You gave me these questions in advance, but you see how many of them you gave me?
Yes, Reverend
Okay.
Stan.
Look, this is like, am I writing a thesis or am I writing a dissertation? That's the question. So which one
You
is it?
like talking, so you don't mind.
O- Okay. Okay. Um, so go back to the book, and Genesis is let us make man. And when we look at some of the principal assignments in the passages of scripture, which are the meta narrative of scripture, Genesis
Hmm.
chapter 1, Genesis chapter 2, and then if we unpack and go forward, we're going to find that God's intention in creation is to actually unpack through his image in flesh, what that which is connected with um, subduing and replenishing, caretaking, caregiving, stewarding, um, house banding, if you will, um,
I'm
setting the
sorry.
appropriate
House banding. What is that?
husbanding. That's where that word comes from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so a husband is a house bander,
Hmm.
which is someone who essentially establishes, one, establishes, two, feels full, And then obviously three, protects the boundaries. So
Mm,
you name a space and you claim that space, and then you fill that space with your name. Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
All right.
yeah.
So before we move on to the next question, we had a couple people pop in.
Yes,
So
ma'am.
Stephanie says, "Hey, Rev."
Hey,
She made a little joke saying she got to get her dictionary, but she does know what
stop,
viable means.
stop, stop.
I don't know who the goats is, but thank you for watching. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them in a couple of minutes. But I wanted to finish up with some of the questions, Reverend Stan.
Okay.
So what are some of the ways a man can improve the relationship that he has with himself? Also, Terrio says hello. Hey, Terrio.
Hey, what's up, Terry? O? T is in the space.
Yes, thank you for
Yes.
watching.
Sorry, T man. I'm not trying to put all the stuff out there, man. I promise. I promise.
Okay.
What's the
So you
question? I'm sorry.
what are some ways a man can improve the relationship he has with himself?
Okay. So this piece about the whole reflective, contemplative aspects, I want to encourage obviously that a man be in a community with other men. I think it's very important, which is why the barbershop um, can potentially be a space where he does man business. He talks about some stuff. He gets a man's perspective on reality. I think that's helpful, just so that he's in a dialogue where men are coming from man framings and masculine men framings. In particular, there's some others that are definitely a part of the spirit, but I think the masculine male perspective on the reality, which is ours to partake in. I think
Hmm.
that's an important ingredient.
Yeah.
Um, the company of healthy men. Let me just say it that
Mm,
way.
yes.
Um, um, I think it helps, and I may get pushback on this, but I think it helps that one layer in that company is your brethren, folk that are who are in the same um, stage phase of being men. So
Hmm.
those are your partners. I think that's an important group of brethren to have in your journey. So they're about your same age, or if they're not, they're certainly in the same stage of what
Yeah.
it means to be a man. But I think that the intergenerational link up to some men who are from a different generation is an important part in that conversation and connection as well. Um, some older men,
Yeah.
um, and some older men's perspective on who you are and what you're walking through, I think is very helpful. Obviously, they will probably say we didn't have Google and Apple or Windows or whatever else, but they will talk about the themes in life, which I think are pretty much standard. I think those themes are pretty much standard, irrespective of when in the time frame chronologically you deal with, chirepically speaking, as a human male, you're going to deal with some of the same
Yeah.
challenges, especially if you're talking about your relationship, because you being a man in a relationship with a woman is pretty much the same. It boils down to how you either can build bonds and break down barriers, or don't know how to build bonds and allow big walls to develop, and things begin to deteriorate. So older men can speak to that in theme, and they can also speak to that on the basis of how they know themselves in ways you have not yet let yourself know yourself. That I think can also be helpful. So the conversation with healthy men across the spectrum of the ages, um, in your age group and older than you, I think that's very helpful. But I think there's the other space where you actually have a man or some men with whom you're not just, having, the barbershop conversation, but you actually allow some men to hold you accountable to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's a harder one to do. I think we may have talked about this in some ways, that support systems are harder, I think, for males in general and men in particular, especially if you talk ethnographically and then in a lot of some specific psychographics. I think it becomes even more problematic for them to engineer and sustain. And so, but I think that's important, that you have some brethren who you give permission to ask you hard questions,
Mm-hmm.
and regularly. That's just going to be a part of the deal. You all give each other permission. Okay, so you know me. I'm very transparent. I know that I can trust to be forthcoming about all of the motivations which drive me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
so so in probably in your generation, you're familiar with the Enneagram.
Yes, I am.
Yes. Yeah. So the Enneagram intentionally speaks to what drives a person, not only in terms of, motives, but fears,
Mm-hmm.
and things on that order. And I think to have a set of relationships which go deeper than the barbershop dialogue, interaction, interchange, where you have, and it'll probably be a smaller group, but nevertheless, substantially, qualitatively solid men who you give permission, you invite them to come at you with real, let's talk about what's happening in your journey,
Yeah.
um and hold you responsible for you.
Mm. Yeah.
um yeah, I know for myself, there are 3 or 4 men, um without whom I would not be here right now. And it's because, sometimes I didn't give them permission. They just barged in. Yo, we got to talk. And I got questions, and you have to answer them. But that level of responsibility to some other men, I think, is invaluable. I would say that's layer two. I would also add as a third layer that when you know that your brothers, even the ones who are trying to walk with you and challenge you to be accountable, have come with you as far as you can go. I don't think it's a I think it's actually a requisite thing to go ahead and sit down with someone who can therapeutically help you process yourself.
Meaning a therapist or a
A
counselor
therapist, a therapist and a counselor.
and a counselor.
Mhm.
Okay. So we have a comment. Support systems for men are harder because of societal pressures of being completely independent and being a rock and not sharing emotions and such. We're more closed-minded to wanting help. Did you have anything to speak to that, Reverend Stan?
I actually agree. I think that is a challenge, especially because, and there it is. He said there's a social construct, and it borrows from some of the quote unquote paradigms in the ideal man in our Western design. John Wayne is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So here's the guy. He doesn't even have a Tonto. This is John Wayne. John Wayne didn't even have a Tonto. At least the Lone Ranger had a Tonto, a sidekick. But
Uh-huh.
but John Wayne has no one, and he functions like that. He rides off by himself into every sunset on every screen, that is principal to his fame and renown as John Wayne, the Duke. Um, and so the Duke is a paradigm in the Western design of, which epitomizes the man, and that's unfortunate because that is an underdeveloped uh, template. At I mean, that isn't even an independent man. If we deal with the stories where John Wayne plays the hero, he's not even a healthy version of a hero. Just to keep it real, and
Mm.
and he names it. Be Terrific actually names it when they talk about, not
That's
sharing
Terrio.
emotions. Oh, that's
That's Terrio.
Terrio.
Yeah.
Yeah, Terrio names it. He's right on target. I agree with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, men don't cry. I remember that. Big boys don't cry. That was the first version I got when I was a little kid. Big boys don't cry, and then that turned into men don't cry.
Mm.
But if you're a big boy, if you're not a little boy, okay, if you're a little boy, okay, but if you're a big boy, you don't cry anymore. You suck it up. You learn. And what have you learned? You've learned not to show or share your emotions, which means um, you have learned a way to navigate without being transparent or forthcoming.
Mm.
And you've learned it not just necessarily to cope. You have learned it not just necessarily to cope. You have learned it as a function of whether you have matured and become more like a grown man. That's dangerous, but that's where we are. That's our culture.
How
But
do we move?
can we
I'm
keep it
sorry, go
real?
ahead. Yeah,
Can we
yeah.
keep it real?
Hmm.
Can we keep it real, real?
Yes.
Okay. Which sisters do you know want a crying man? Just go ahead and keep it 100.
Okay, let's specify crying, Rivers.
Okay. So if a man is sensitive and in touch with his emotions and shares that layer of the depth of who he is at Soulsville level,
I think a mature woman would appreciate a man like that. What, Rivers? Was my did my answer not suffice?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. You got people who may I don't know. I don't know. They're called simps nowadays. What's simps mean?
Basically, it's a man who who y'all help me out with this definition. Like a simp is a man who is very emotional, who expresses himself a lot, who um follows after a woman, who yields to her, who gives her everything that she desires and wants. Some society has called that a simp.
Okay.
Some, yes, Terrio said a man that's emotional.
Right. So I'm just going to talk about what the barbershop
I'm sorry. Somebody said a sap, if you will.
a sap. Okay. There we go. So here we go. So let's just keep that's why I said if we're going to keep it 100 in the barbershop, that brother is soft. That's what we call them, the barbershop that I attend because you can tell I don't have to really go if I don't want to. But the barbershop that I attend, that's a soft brother. That brother's soft. He's soft.
So
And
how do
and and
I'm
okay,
sorry, go ahead.
and in the barbershop I attend, that's not the market. That brother's not at the top of the market. Sisters are not lining up trying. No, that's not. That's. I may be off, but the barbershop is saying that brother is soft, and he may not just be soft. There may be other questions, but the point I'm attempting to get at from the perspective of who he attracts or fails to attract, there's not a long line of sisters saying that's the guy. That's the kind of man I want in my life. That's the man that I want leading my life. That's not what that is not. Mm-mm.
Okay, I want to say that's 100% false. There may be some truth to that, but as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to stick to my point that a
Okay.
mature woman will appreciate a man who expresses his emotion and can communicate those things, and you know will cry in front of her. What's so funny, Reverend Stan?
What's in the comments? I can see this comment, and Lord help him if he doesn't have anything else going on.
Listen, we this is not a battle of sexes, okay, Terrio?
I'm,
So
I'm not battling. I'm not battling. What I'm attempting to do is hopefully be candid with
yeah.
on a practical level what the perception is of a young man who a young man or a mature man who who is perceived to be very sensitive, very emotional, and that's irrespective of how he bounds other areas of his personhood. If he comes off as too sentimental, then that's not perceived as strength. It's not
Mm,
perceived as strength. It's not perceived as strength. It's not perceived as confidence. So it's not perceived as strength or confidence. And that's just as a practical point of reference, just to be practical.
Okay, we okay.
And and I'm not gonna push you to answer that one, but that's the table talk at the barbershop.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. That's fair. So I was before I go into my next question, I think you definitely were speaking to this earlier about the double standard with boys versus girls and being at that, 12 to 18 age frame. Um and so I feel like society, i.e. social media, has an impact on the way our young people, even my generation, view certain relationships online, or how, or their view of like certain men. And sometimes I feel like unhealthy men, boys can gravitate towards or see them as someone that is a good model of how to be or how to behave and present themselves. So, what encouragement would you have for the audience when it comes to like right mentorship and finding, you talk about the older generation, and having being in company with healthy men. How would you encourage our young men and even our young adult men on finding what what that is, and how to go about doing that?
Wow, that's a hard one to answer. I hate to have to say it. That's a hard
Yeah.
one to answer. I think the so you call this the barbershop, and I'm reluctant to say go to the barbershop, um, because this is my reference point with that. So the barbershop is the place to begin to enter conversations, but I don't
Okay.
know that it's always the place for what you just named.
Yeah.
Okay. um, I'm fortunate. I have relationships in the spaces where I go, where folks are doing the grooming and all that kind of stuff. um, and so, obviously folks know, oh, here comes Rev. So I think that kind of is filtered. I'm being fair with that one. I'm trying to be fair with the fact that folk have preconceived pieces because they know that a part of my identity is I'm a spiritual leader in the community. Okay. But if I was a young man and no one knew anything about me, I would just put a filter on and a caution about, okay, I'm going to go to the barbershop and find quote unquote those kinds of people, because I don't know that that is always going to be the case. In fact, I would
Yeah.
say that that is the much that's much more likely to be the exception in that type of space, which is
Yeah.
why I would say that one of the first places I would try to find that would be in you're talking about the media piece. um, you have you have at your ready, in my opinion, more options than I had in my formative years for the same question to be answered, because you do have social media.
Mm.
So I think you have asset. Obviously, it could be a
Okay.
liability, but you do
Right.
have the asset of modern technology, and we're using it right now. So you have the latitude, depending on which of the different platforms, apps, whatever you are
Yeah.
framing and calling them, to
Yeah.
actually go find number one, go find communities, or actually form number two. You can go form a community and say,
Mm.
this is what we're about in here. This is our mission. um, and then on the basis of naming the mission, similarly minded folk will gravitate towards it, because that is the orb, which is the 21st century young adult journey in light of technological advancement. So I would say you can find it in ways I couldn't, because I was
Right.
locked in time and space, and the young men, the younger males actually have at the ready, where's mine, with their phone, or their tablet. They can actually either go find one or they can go form one, and then begin to facilitate some of these kinds of connections. I'll illustrate that. Um,
Yes,
I am
please.
I'm a part of a group of young men, most of whom, and this is not barbershop. So, but this is internet based. This is all internet based. This is all on the basis of what's the thing called Google Classrooms and Google Chat. So it's a
Yeah.
combination of using all Google stuff. So it's all Google stuff. It's all Google based stuff
Yeah. Hmm.
where a group of men, most of them, in fact, the young man who leads the group is in his mid 30s. Um, and so he just invited, he just sent out a random text to some people that he knew from different seasons in his journey. He self identified. This is who I am. This is where I am in my journey as a follower of Jesus. This is where I am in my journey as a man. Um, and I'm looking for other men who are either
Mm,
in the same season of life or would like to walk with me in this season of mine
yeah.
to be a part of this digital community. And it has worked.
Yeah.
It has worked. We're
That's a good
studying.
point.
Go ahead.
No, no, no. Go ahead. Finish your point.
Yeah, I was going to say, so we're studying together thematically the life of Job, because the thing that this brother is wanting to deal with in his life, in light of the word of God, is evil and suffering that he did not deserve.
Mm, yeah.
And that's a part of being a man. Especially
Mm,
if you're going to deal with being a chocolate covered man, you're going to deal with evil and suffering that you didn't deserve. What did I do to
right.
you? I don't even know your name. Why are you giving me this kind of flex? It's not necessary.
Yeah.
It's this right here. I'm sorry. This is the skin color. And so
Yeah.
he's trying to process suffering. And he wants to reference it so that it can be an enriching point of his journey, and not something that tears him down. And so he's like, look, this is what I'm dealing with. Who wants to walk with a brother? And I was like, and I welcome the opportunity to walk with him in his journey.
Mm.
I think I just, am I back
Yes, you're back.
for a minute?
Yeah, you were, yeah, I heard everything you were saying. It was a little choppy, but you're
Okay.
back. But I think you raise a very good point in that you can also find healthy community online. Um, I just kind of see for young teen boys who may not know like what healthy looks like because they're constantly surrounded by negativity or toxicity, how can they begin to figure out what healthy looks like for them? Because I don't know if they would know.
Mhm. Yeah, and that's the so I listed two layers. So one is brothers who are in your same journey, season in life, or who want to be a part of this season in your life. The other was the intergenerational piece where you identify and enlist some elders. But I think if we're going to follow Second Timothy 2:2, you have to look back. So you have to go look for some younger men. Um, so, like I said, I'm about to do my sixth decade. So for me, finding younger men who are in their 40s, finding younger men who are in their 30s,
Mm-hmm.
finding younger men who
Mm-hmm.
are in their 20s, and identifying them, and saying,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what's going to be the thing that we share in common? Because in some cases it's not Christ, but what do we
Yeah.
share in common? Whether it's geographically framed, ethnographically framed, psychographically framed, however it's framed, that is a point of reference where I can begin to uh, do life, be a part of the life of younger men. And I think that's a part of the triad. An older, a group of older men, one, two, some fellow comrades, two, and then three, who in the next generation um, will you make a deposit? Um, because Psalm 145, I think it's Psalm 145. David says, "One generation will tell another generation," and that's concerning the activity of God, obviously one, but not only the activity of God, but on the basis of the activity of God, the attributes of God that have become a part of our reality because of the way God moved. We know this to be who God is, and because we experience this about who God is, it becomes a part of who we are and choose to be because we want to be like God. But I think the find some older brothers, identify some folks who will be uh, be in your fellowship, and then also some younger men that you're like, okay, I want to make this investment. I am who I
Mm-hmm.
am, penultimately because of Eugene Burrell. I want to name him. He was my campus minister when I was at Howard University, which is still the mecca of higher education in the free world. Um,
Yes, we
um,
know.
if you don't know, you better ask somebody named Stanley. I'll tell you. But um, Eugene poured into my life. And it was a short window, but the short window of his qualitative investment has reaped dividends in my journey.
Mm,
It was a short window. I wish to God that I had allowed that man to give himself to me the whole time I was at Howard. I didn't.
yeah.
Um, I think I would be much further up the road. I would be much freer in relationship to some choices that I chose for myself. And I think there would be even greater fulfillment if I had let this man pour developmentally into the early parts of my journey before I started making a lot of choices. And so I would say that when we're talking about this whole piece of relationships, there's an opportunity. I know at this point in my journey, both let me just go ahead and say this too. So there are some men who have failed. They have failed dismally, but I value their reference point. I value their reference point. I'll never forget.
Hmm.
I serve at a church here in New Jersey, which is the New Jerusalem. I'm gonna put that plug in too. The New Jerusalem. This is the place that will be the promised land. You can bank on that. When the Lord, He's just gonna be boom right here in the Garden State.
Okay.
I'll talk about that if
Okay.
somebody cares. That's my opinion. But I say that for this reason. I remember, and I remember it that that we had a youth lock-in. We had youth
Hmm.
lock-in at this church, and at the very beginning, we invited one of the older men in the church to share his testimony. I'll never
Hmm.
forget this. I'll never forget the way what he said reverberated in the room. He got up, he said his name, and then he said, "I've done enough crack cocaine and heroin for everybody in this room."
Ooh.
And then he unpacked his testimony. and
Mm.
and it changed the whole room. Everybody in the room was impacted by how this man rehearsed the sparing mercy of God, the power of grace in his life, um, and and nobody was the same.
Wow.
And I say that for this reason. I think there's value. This is often the issue for a lot of men not participating, I think, in specific capacities in faith communities, is because they did make some very catastrophic
Mm.
choices. Okay. But I believe that David himself, David, a man after God's own heart, becomes a reference point to the value of said men in your journey. Psalm 51, David says, "Restore unto me the joy of my salvation. Then will I teach transgressors your ways." So David becomes a marker in his manhood for how other men can benefit from how God, by his mercy, God by his grace, God by his truth, spared him from a completely catastrophic and utterly wretched self-destruction.
Yeah.
And so I think that those kinds of men are valuable too. wherever they
Yeah.
are along the thing, to be a part of the recipe and the menu of who we include and who we enlist, who we invite to be in our journey.
Mm, mm. That's good. I like that you gave that example with David, who was a man after God's own heart, but still fell short and
Mhm.
was able to, move forward in God.
Yep.
So, what encouragement would you like to leave for the men concerning their relationship with themselves?
Mm, with themselves.
Yes.
Wow. With themselves, I would say. Um, I'm going to come back to this brother's testimony that night. He said the most important thing that the forgiveness that he received from God helped him with was his capacity to apply what God's grace meant to his relationship with God to his relationship with himself.
Mm,
Um, so he carried a lot of guilt. He carried a
yeah.
lot of shame. He carried a lot of anger and rage with himself about himself because of what he knew
Yeah.
um, about. He knew about his own motives. He knew himself. If he deal with himself in the full light of the day of the truth of God's word. This is who I am. This is why I made that choice. And being able to forgive himself was a non-negotiable cornerstone in the healing process, in
Hmm.
moving beyond his brokenness. Um, who is it? Ken Sandy. Ken Sandy writes a book called The Peacemaker. And he actually has a website. If you if and I'm not trying because I don't get any money out of none of this. I just commend what I think are very good, I think resources.
Yeah.
So his
Uh-huh.
website, website RW, that's R as in Roger, W as in Wayne, 360.org. It's supposed to be 360 degrees of relational wisdom. That's what that means.
Mm,
But what he talks about there is that the most important thing that can happen in a person's journey is to become God aware. And on the
yes.
basis of God awareness, to be in a place of humility and a place of forgiveness, to experience God's forgiveness and therefore be a humble person as a basis for the next most important chapter in the journey, and that's to be self aware.
Mm-hmm.
So he frames it. His paradigm is God awareness facilitates healthy God awareness facilitates healthy self awareness, which facilitates healthy others awareness.
Mm,
And to the extent we really explore and implement the forgiveness of God, which is ours. Um, Beloved, now are we the sons of God, and it doth not yet appear. To the extent we really allow the doth not yet appear to begin to appear, then we can actually make progress in our healing, in our
mm,
wholeness. And I think that especially for men, young men, who are dealing with a variety of deficits and deficiencies, dealing with some level of culpability in where they find themselves, is not somebody else's fault. This is where I am as a part of stuff that I actually engineered. I formulated it. I made it so.
yeah.
Being able to forgive yourself, um, and then on the basis of applying the mercy, and the grace of God, implementing His truth, so that we can move beyond pain and then start making progress. Proverbs 16, verse 6 says, "By mercy and truth, iniquity is purged," and so there's mercy there. So we can actually experience from God the pardon. We do not, because God is merciful, get the full consequence, the full brunt of what we deserve for how we chose. Um, but by mercy and truth, iniquity is purged. And And by the fear, verse 6 of chapter 6 continues, by the fear of the Lord, men depart from evil. So there's not just
Mhm.
the sense that they leave off from something else, but there's actually, in the sense of leaving off a bad path, the understanding that they're making progress in a good path.
Mhm.
So I think that that would be, from my vantage point, my encouragement to allow the grace of God to facilitate you making progress and forgiving yourself.
Mm.
Yeah.
That was a powerful explanation, and I thank you that I thank you for that, Reverend Stan. At this time, I would like to open up for questions. If you guys have it in the chat, if you don't have any questions, please let Reverend Stan know how much you enjoyed this podcast. I have had the privilege of knowing Reverend Stan for, I would say, what, over 15 years?
Yeah.
I transferred to Rutgers University where we where we first met in 2006. And so no, that's a little longer than 15 years, right?
Is it? You said you translated what year?
I
2006.
transferred 2006. Yeah.
So like 18.
I think so. I think
Wow.
so. And so
Wow. Oh my goodness.
so I have had the pleasure of sitting under Reverend Stan's tutelage and just learning from him just empowering me and encouraging me on my journey, even as an adult. And so I wanted you to come on this podcast to share that same wealth of knowledge and just information with our viewers, because I feel like God desires for us to do relationships in a different way, in a healthier
Yeah.
way, so that we are flourishing, thriving, living in
Mhm.
abundance, even in our relationships. And I think what we were talking about earlier when we first started the podcast about how men go through things as well. And so I did not want to leave our fellas out, and I wanted to have someone of your caliber, Reverend Stan, to speak to our men. So, what better person than you? So, thank you again, Reverend Stan. Um,
So
Terrio said, always a pleasure learning and talking with you, Reverend Stan.
likewise, Terrio, I'm grateful to get a chance to connect via this mechanism. What's this called? What's this app called?
Stream yard.
StreamYard. I'm sorry, I'm not that person. I'm really not the technology person. I just clicked.
Um,
Um,
so,
I am very proud of you. I'm very proud of
thank you,
you.
Reverend
The steps that you're making with this, your podcast, the books that you've written, the ways that you're active in the community, the ways that you masterfully model the role that you have, and just want you to know I am very proud of you.
Thank
Um,
you.
and
Thank you, Reverend Stan.
glad to see you continuing to strive forward, and
Yes.
to embody the things that you talk about. So there you go.
Thank you. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am.
Jessica says, thank you so much for your wise words. This was eye opening for me.
Mm.
Yes.
To God be
Thank
all the
you.
glory.
Yes, that's my
Yeah,
little sister.
yeah. Oh
Okay.
wow, little sis, how you doing?
Yes, thank you, Terrio. Thank you so, so much. I appreciate you guys staying for as long as you did.
Mm.
Shakira is giving you a round of applause. That's my big sister, Reverend Stan.
Big sis, how you doing? How you doing?
Yes.
Yes. Wow,
Um,
18 years.
18 years. Yep. So Nicole is watching as well, Nichelle's twin. So she was viewing as well. She commented earlier. She said I was right, so I had to put that out there.
You were right about what?
I don't know. I don't know, but she said I was right. I'll take that.
That's
Okay,
it.
just
You right.
all right. Any questions, guys? Oh, she said Nichelle's there too. Hey, Shell.
Hey, Nichelle, how you doing?
Okay. So usually, Verbistan, um, my other sister's on here too. Alicia, thank you for watching. Alicia, thank you all for
Wonderful.
tuning in. Thank you all for tuning in. I
So,
hope you got something out of
so
it.
I get
Yes,
to ask you
Verbistan?
some. So do I get to ask you some questions?
Yeah, you can ask me a question. Verbistan,
I saw that look. I saw. I'm gonna ask my question. I want to ask my question.
really?
I'm not. This is the barbershop, right? So I already blasted the barbershop. The brother's gonna be looking at me funny, like, "Yo, you was on the show talking about what we do at the barbershop, putting brother stuff out there like that." And okay,
You want to ask me a question? Go ahead.
I guess here's the point. So you obviously this is a counterpoint to a conversation that's ongoing,
Yes.
right? So, so the beauty shop conversation general to the barbershop conversation. Is that a fair reference point?
Yes, that is a fair reference point.
Thank you. So I just wanted to make sure it was a fair reference point because it might not be a fair reference point in light of the filtering of the larger meta narrative. Okay.
Verbistan.
Hey, I'm not trying to start none. I just know it already be some. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Because I know the bar here. This is my reference point. On two occasions, I went to the beauty shop. One with Trina, one with Shariah.
Okay. Hmm.
Okay, so I know the beauty shop has a commensurate type of set of dialogues.
Hmm.
Just to kind of frame this, which become entry points for other types of communal contact points and dialogues. Some of them are not developmental. Just to some of them it is intended to be a it, I'll just say it doesn't help when we're talking about
Hmm.
the principal conversation. How do we do relationships better?
Yes.
Okay, so from your vantage point, here's my question. That was preface. You got the barbershop here, you got the beauty shop there. I've attempted to be as forthcoming as I can in relationship to what I think when we talk moving from dependence, independence, and interdependence in light of the larger paradigm uh, of how adults grow up to be grown people are problematic spaces for men folk. What would you say would be commensurate challenges for women folk? That is talked about at the beauty shop level. You got to give all the goods because I ain't trying to get you in trouble.
You know what I'm saying? You are gonna get me in trouble. But no, to answer your question, I feel that some of the challenges um on the female side is that we are taught, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, that we are taught to be super independent. And so I think when it comes to relationships, it can it can give certain dynamics for a female to be the head or to be very strong-willed or to take the lead on certain things. And I think that can it gives a certain dynamic between male and female relationships,
Hmm.
where women can emasculate men if they
Hmm.
are not at a certain place in their lives, or they're not able to bring certain qualities or finances to the table. So I think that at a very young age, to what you were speaking about earlier, as young girls, at a very young age, we are taught to be hyper independent and not to depend
Yep.
on a man. So
Yeah.
and I think there is a cultural reference to that as well. I feel like African American women are taught that more than our counterparts.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's a cultural piece to that. That's a coping piece. Um, I'm curious. This is an older book, but the title of the book is "Men Who Won't Lead and Women Who Won't Follow." Um,
Mm,
I don't know if that book. So there may be a modern corollary to that in terms of content. I just know that particular book. That book was a part of. Well, it is still a part of what I use when I do premarital with folks. But it names what you've just described.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Good question. We might have to do a podcast series on that. That's a good point.
My name is Bennett. I ain't in it.
Yeah, too
That was
late,
a
Reverend
let's
Stanley.
be let's be clear. That one is a systemic issue.
Oh
Yeah, and
yeah,
that's it's
absolutely.
not just it's not cultural. That's an endemic issue. That's a part of who we are in relationship to the fall. But yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
I would agree. All right, people are still commenting. Shakira said, "I'm grateful for all the valid points and every um thing Reverend Stan and Nicole has expressed. It was truly a pleasure to tune in. Stay blessed." Terrio said, "He ain't gonna help you, Reverend Stan."
Hey, look, if you start anything, I got you. That's why I'm trying to get quickly out of this one. But I did think that was an important book in light of the point you made because
Yeah,
I think you're on target with some of those dynamics. Appreciate you
yeah.
being candid without blasting the beauty shop.
All right, y'all. Thank you for tuning in. I will leave the affirmation in the comment. Reverend Stan also has some literature that he prepared for today's podcast. And so I will send you guys that information as well. If you are watching the replay, please, comment, share this with your friends or whomever would benefit from watching today's podcast series. So until then, you guys have a great night and be well. Thank you, Reverend Stan.